Hi everyone. Today we have a special guest, Professor Sophie Zechmeister-Boltenstern. She is a professor of soil science and soil microbiology at the University of Natural Resource and Applied Life Sciences, also known as BOKU in Vienna. And she's also head of Soil Research Institute. And she's an expertise in biodiversity and function of soil organisms and their interactions, biology of the nitrogen cycle, climate change and greenhouse gas, and metabolism of gas in soils. She's also known as one of the today's influential researchers. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here and making it happen, Professor.
Thank you, Naseke, for taking this initiative and for creating these interesting podcasts. I'm happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. So I'm more honored than you to have this podcast, and I tried to make the questions as much and as more informative as possible because I know that you've done very interesting research. So I will jump into the questions and discussions. So first, what we don't know about nitrogen cycle?
Okay. Yes, actually, I read this question the other way around. What we do know about the nitrogen cycle, we know a lot about the nitrogen cycle, but we still have a lot of problems with managing the nitrogen cycle. So what human beings have done is like tearing open the nitrogen cycle, which by nature is a very closed system. So the funny thing about the nitrogen cycle is that it is like there is huge amounts of nitrogen out there, namely in the atmosphere. We have 80% of N2 gas is 80% of our atmosphere. So this is loads of nitrogen. But this nitrogen is very inert, as well as the nitrogen which is in stones. So plants cannot access it. So plants have evolved always during a surrounding of nitrogen limitation. So now the human beings have come into this, and they have torn the nitrogen cycle open and created lots of reactive nitrogen compounds, which are now posing threats to the water and to the atmosphere and even to human health. And yes, and these reactive compounds is what we have to be concerned about. And maybe we know how we theoretically could make the nitrogen cycle in agriculture, for example, more efficient. But practically, there are still lots of open questions. Let me pose it like this, to make a very, very long story very short.
So we can say that we've already discovered so much about nitrogen, but there are still parts of nitrogen cycle to be discovered.
Yes, well, there are news popping up now, then and there, about certain microorganisms, for example, which can conduct two processes which formerly we thought were only conducted could only be conducted by two different sorts of organisms, and there are new processes discovered and other organisms which special abilities discovered. But maybe in the big picture, the challenge is to manage the nitrogen cycle in a way which is conducive for food production and the environment, and not to threat biodiversity, and not to waste any nitrogen, not to waste it into the groundwater and into the atmosphere, which is happening at huge scale these days.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's interesting to see the use of nitrogen, nitrogen use behavior in different countries, especially in Asia, where I come from. And the partially is that we use a lot of nitrogen, and which also causes the emission. Here, I was interested, because you've done some of the research. What do you find interesting about the nitrogen cycle? Like, you've observed that so much things happening differently in agriculture, also in environment. So what do you find interesting about it?
I find everything interesting about the nitrogen cycle. But one thing I've been working recently on is, for example, there are many scientists who think that nitrogen is adding nitrogen to the soils would increase carbon storage in soils. And this has even been taken up by policymakers. For example, in Canada, like the large scale forest fertilization is supported by the government under the umbrella of climate, in boosting the carbon sequestration in the forests, because the idea behind it is that the forests grow better and can take up more CO2. And another idea behind it is that scientists found out that their decomposition is slowed down in the litter layer of these soils and in the upper horizons of these soils, and so that more carbon can accumulate there. But we did some research, and I was always skeptical about that, because maybe Europeans are more concerned about too much nitrogen as compared to the Northern America. Because here it has become a problem earlier, and the problem of acid rain is in the head of all the scientists. And so I did some research and had a very good PhD student who worked on that, and we could show that yes, there is an increase of carbon accumulation with nitrogen addition in the upper layers or in the litter layer of the forest, but at the same time, the lower minerals of soil, like the lower layers of the soil, are depleted of nitrogen. And so what does this mean for the environment and for practice? It means that we, by fertilizing our forests, we exchange the long-term carbon, the long-living carbon in the deeper soil horizons for short-lived carbon in the litter layer. So to our findings, we think it's not a good idea. We could see that the total stocks of carbon did not change, and we are exchanging short-lived carbon, long-lived carbon for short-lived carbon. So we make the carbon less stable in the soil. So maybe coming back to your questions is that I find it really interesting to look at these interactions between nitrogen and other compounds, especially carbon, nitrogen and carbon interactions. That's really a very fascinating topic.
Mm-hmm. You've been also mentioning and studying the drying rewetting stress in microbial communities. As you mentioned about the forest, I was also wanted to mention what are the responses of microbial communities to drying and rewetting stress?
Yes, so this is another field of research, which another group of researchers in my institute, or like a group which is chaired by myself, is investigating for many years now, especially in the BOKU teaching forest. Yes, what we observe with climate change is that there will be more, and there are already more extreme events. So, which means a higher frequency of droughts. They occur more often, and a longer duration of drought. And so we started drying, rewetting field site in the forest, where we build in roofs, and we also can spray water on these sites and treatments. And we have like controls which get the natural precipitation, and we have like moderate stress treatment with 1 month of drought and then rewetting, and a severe treatment with 2 months of drought and then a stronger rewetting. And what we can see there, well, for one thing, it's really interesting to see that climate change is happening so fast that sometimes the control is more dry than our moderate treatment. So like we have these long droughts occurring already there in nature, although they did not for the past 30 years. The other thing, what we see is like all the biogeochemistry is altered by these droughts and the rewetting events. And we can see responses of the greenhouse gas emissions and in the nitrogen cycle, but we also see responses in the microbial community composition. And the interesting thing is that the microbial biomass as a total is growing after the rewetting. So more microbes grow there. So you would think that this is a good thing. And the question is why does it happen? But then you have, if you are a soil scientist, so you can imagine that when the soil dries out, it shrinks. And it also becomes water repellent. Mm-hmm. And this means that or sometimes you see pictures where there are like the soil, when it shrinks, it has, it's tearing apart. So you can suddenly see this, where the soil is torn, and also the roots can be torn when the soil is shrinking. And then when the water comes, then first the soil cannot take up the water because its water has become water repellent. But then if there is a long rain for a week or so, then the soil starts to take up the water again and is swelling again. And what do the microbes do? The microbes, they don't like if it's really dry. So they either die, or they fall asleep, or they retreat into spores. So nothing much is happening during these very dry periods. But then when the soil is rewetted, then everything starts to to become very much alive and very active. And now the microbes which have survived and which wake up during the rewetting, they have loads of food because they have their dead colleagues, which they will eat. And they also have new surfaces of the shrinking and swelling of the soil. So new surfaces which they could not access before. So they could not go into certain aggregates before and eat the stuff which was there. And suddenly they have lots of food and also lots of solutes, which are chemical solutes, which are mobilized by the water. So they and the microbes have a big buffet to eat, and they eat a lot, and they become big, and they divide, and they grow, and multiply. But on the other hand, it's not all the microbes which can do this. So the microbial community is changing. So some microbes like this, they can adapt very quickly, and some other can't. And for example, we have seen that some fungi are affected more than bacteria by this drought rewetting stress. And within the group of fungi, the primitive fungi can profit most. So, for example, we have more ascomycetes, which can use these sugars and these easily digestible substrates and thrive on that. And we also have, like, among the bacteria, some, for example, copiotrophic bacteria, which copiotrophic means more or less shit-eating bacteria. And they can thrive very much by also using these simple substrates. So it means that the whole biodiversity is changed, the community is altered, and this means also the functions of the soil is altered. So there is a lot of activity after rewetting. There is microbial growth after rewetting, but there is a system change and there is a change of functions. And the interesting thing here is that even 1 year afterwards, you can see these changes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so the changes is so fast.
Yes, the changes occur very quickly. And even 1 year later, even if there was not a drought again and just normal weather, you would see these changes.
Mm-hmm. So you've been also mentioning in some of the parts that it also influenced the greenhouse gas. Mm-hmm. So now I want to switch to the greenhouse gas. So these rewetting and drying events, what are how does it influence the greenhouse gas? Although it seems logical, but overall, what do we know about the greenhouse gas in general so far?
Okay, well, these are two questions. So maybe shortly about this drying, rewetting, and the effects on the greenhouse gases. As like the drought makes everybody fall asleep, as I said before. So not much greenhouse gases are produced, neither CO2 nor nitrous oxide. Mm-hmm. But then when the rewetting happens, then, as I said, there is a lot of activity. There is suddenly a lot of nitrogen available. So then we have pulses of nitrous oxide and CO2 emissions. And these pulses can make up for what has been happening before. So like we have a large boost of CO2 and nitrous oxide emissions. The methane is a different story. as you know, methane is usually taken up by soil bacteria, the greenhouse gas methane, by the bacteria in the forest soil. So the forest soil is a sink for methane. And interestingly, this sink improves during the drought. And what we think is that this is partly a physical process, that like the barrier which closes like if the soil is very wet, it's kind of a barrier for gas diffusion. And now if it's very dry, then there are these holes where the air can diffuse in deeper soil horizons. And so the microbes sitting there can access more methane from the atmosphere, and they have a lot of oxygen, which they need for methane decomposition. So they eat up the methane from the atmosphere. So this is like a positive thing. The other reactions are more controversial. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's still good that there is one positive thing about this event.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But what you have to keep in mind, like as a soil scientist, of course, is that this greenhouse gases is not only about soils, it's very much about plants. And the plants suffer tremendously under the drought. And especially in spruce forests, you then can get bark beetle attacks and you can have dying trees, lots of dying trees. And this is, of course, bad for the climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So even though there is a little benefit, like methane thing is increasing, but it has tremendous influences on the ecosystem services. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The plants. Okay. And I was actually, in the preparation for this interview, I was looking some of your research papers, and I put it the exact title as a question because the title was so captivating. It's as I asked you, what's the impact of extreme weather? That was how well do we understand greenhouse gas emissions from soils? So this was the title. You published this work in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's 10 years later. You've been still doing research around that topic. And I just want to know if your opinion changed much, or maybe you have more to say on this question.
Well, of course, there are loads of studies going on everywhere in the world on this topic. So we do understand a lot more about greenhouse gas emissions from soils. But like the basic ideas which we presented at that time are still valid. So what we said is that like we understand quite well the effects of single factors. For example, we understand quite well the physical processes, and concerning the biological processes, we can understand, like, for example, how does soil moisture affect greenhouse gas emissions from soil? How does temperature affect greenhouse gas emissions from soil? And this is quite clear. Also, the effect on land use or on land use change on greenhouse gas emissions from soil. These are like the simple, easier to answer questions, and the other questions which are less well understood, they still we can continue doing research here for quite a while because it includes all the interactions. Like, for example, the interactions of greenhouse gas emissions from soils with other factors like air quality, air pollution, ozone. Yes, like the interactions and the feedback effects are less well understood, still not so good understood. And of course, we have better models these days. So this makes it easier to also simulate complex interactions. But most of the research is like covering linear processes. So we think that with a raise of temperature, degree by degree, we will have a rise in greenhouse gas emission because all the biological processes react to temperature. But we don't know, or it is less well, we know a bit, but it's less well understood where are the threshold effects and where are the non-linear processes. So it could, for example, or it can happen that there is an increase of activity until a certain temperature, and then the whole thing is, the whole system is shifting. So we know, for example, photosynthesis of plants works very well until, well, it depends on the plant, but until 28 degrees Celsius, for example. And then if you go about 35 degrees, then like the plants will stop and they cannot do any photosynthesis anymore. And this is much more difficult to include into the models. And all these processes are linked together. And like, if the whole system shifts from one state to another state, then it's really difficult to predict what's going to happen. Because this would need very complex experiments. And we had also experiments where we tried to link 2 or 3 different climate change factors and look whether they act single or in combination, and whether there would be a different effect, and we could see that it makes a difference. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So these complex interactions, these are still not very clear.
Mm-hmm. I was just wondering after your answer, yes, we are still yet to get to understand and do more, but also scientists are warning that the climate change is happening, we have very less time. So combining those two, like, will we have time while doing our research? Will we have time to really implement it in the future? Because sometimes
yeah, it is interesting because like I've been in the dealing with greenhouse gases and climate change since the early 1990s, and actually the scientists always knew that there is a problem, and this problem is going to be worse and worse. But of course, you cannot fully prove it unless you make very long experiments and get together very good statistics. But if you wait too long, then it's too late. And actually what happened is that, although it was always there was always a small uncertainty, and the people didn't want to believe it. And they didn't want to change everything because it's difficult to change everything. And so everybody waited and waited. So you cannot wait until you have the full statistical proof until to solve the last questions, but you have to start changing things earlier, because then if the whole system has changed, then it's too late.
Mm-hmm. Doing something is better than just sitting and waiting for.
Yeah, and actually, like the way to go was quite clear always. So I think it's really important to carefully look at the options and evaluate the options, but then start doing something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's at the moment. Actually, this is happening. Like in the field of carbon farming, we are far from having solved all the problems, but people are starting to act already, which can, of course, mean that some stupid things are done, but I think many good things are also done.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there has also been an initiative to put more carbon into the soil. So I think in this context, I can also mention there is a biochar becoming very famous. Maybe it was famous before, but for me, it seems like now it's highly, very famous among the scientists, mostly mentioned. Can biochar amendment applications induce greenhouse gas emissions?
Do you mean that they increase greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes.
No? Why do you think that?
No. Because there could be an opinion that the more you put the biochar into the soil, maybe at certain point it will start to emit carbon. But I know that the carbon is not available in the biochar because it's so stable for a longer term.
Yes. So actually from our projects and our experiments, and also most experiments, it is the other way around. You put biochar into the soil in order to bury very stable, a very stable form of carbon in the soil. Mm-hmm. So, and the biochar is pure carbon, and it lasts for thousands and thousands of years. And that's why you bury it in the soil, because like it is, you can put it there, and it is a way of storing the carbon away. And at the same time, this biochar in the soil improves the water holding capacity of the soil, and it also improves the slow release of nutrients. Like usually you should not put biochar alone in the soil because it sucks up all the nutrients. It has a very big surface which can hold the nutrients like nitrogen, but also other nutrients. And it also holds microbes which form biofilms around this biochar. And that's also why the Indians, the indigenous population of the Amazon region, they created very fertile soils by using the charcoal from their fires together with organic waste material and compost and put it into the soils. And over the years, the soils became very enriched with this carbon, humus, and nutrients, and are much more fertile and produce much better crops. And also what's happening if you put biochar into the soil, you store CO2. So that's for CO2. And concerning nitrous oxide, the other very important greenhouse gas, you have a negative effect on the greenhouse gas emissions, at least in the first time. So most studies show that it's not a very long-lasting effect because, as I said, at some point the surface of the biochar is covered with nutrients, and then you don't have this dampening effect on the emissions. But biochar is good, and it is been, like, some countries have it in the focus for their reduction of greenhouse gases, use application of biochar to the soils. On the other hand, it's like it has some drawbacks. It's expensive. You have to produce it. You must produce it from waste materials. It has no value to produce it from wood because wood is too precious. You have, of course, it needs, in order to create biochar, you can take, for example, waste material from vineyards, and then you have to burn them under the exclusion of oxygen. And this has to be regulated very carefully, otherwise you can produce toxic side compounds. And of course it needs energy. So like the biochar costs something. So, and you would need large amounts of biochar to really have a big impact. But some countries like Norway, for example, they count very much on the biochar as a future measure. And it also, if you have very degraded soils, it's maybe very useful. You can see a stronger effect, for example, in very sandy soils compared to clay soils. But in Austria, generally speaking, there are other methods for improving farming and storing carbon in the soils, sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, which maybe are more applicable on the large scale. So like greening or minimum tillage and putting back organic waste, cycling of nutrients. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In combination with the previous questions which we've discussed on drying rewetting, you said that drying rewetting has positive influence on the carbon sink. But here, when we are sequestering carbon, not only biochar, in general, when we are sequestering carbon in the soil, like what influence does it somehow change how the methane functions? Especially in temperate forests, we know temperate regions. We know that the soils of temperate region are carbon sinks.
Yeah. Well, what I told you before, it relates to the methane sink and not the other greenhouse gases. So the methane sink is actually methane transformation. So the methane is decomposed to CO2 by the bacteria, and this is a good thing for the greenhouse gas balance. But the methane is not stored in the soil. So like the CO2, which is a much less reactive greenhouse gas, is emitted instead, and the methane is taken up. But in order to if you cannot say that drought is good for greenhouse gas balance, because you have to calculate all the greenhouse gases, and then you have to take into the account the plant growth. So like in total, the drought is like it changes the system. It has some accelerating effects on climate, but it has also some slowing effects on global warming, and one of these is this methane uptake. But like if you make a calculation of all the free greenhouse gases, then the methane uptake unfortunately is not such a big thing that it can make up for the other greenhouse gases.
Yes, I think it's also, from my experience, I come from the south part of the Kazakhstan, where it's extremely hot and we have dry seasons mostly. And if there is a rain, it's as simulating drying and rewetting, but with least rewetting. And as you said, it's not good. From my experience, I know we don't have much trees and we have very poor vegetation in some of the parts of the country. Especially, there is a joke that you can know the difference between Kazakhstan and Russia when you directly cross the road, because it's a valley, and then when you just enter the Russia, it's trees, many trees. So I think overall percentage and overall impact on the ecosystems of drying and rewetting is not, it doesn't even make to count the positive influence on methane sink, right? So that's,
yeah.
Also, on the second part, what you mentioned, that on the carbon sequestration, yes. So it's not that methane sink is like sequestering more and more, but it's just transforming it to the CO2, which is less.
Yes.
But if you think about the greenhouse global warming potential, it's less.
Yes, exactly. But do your you grasslands in Kazakhstan do they store a lot of carbon? Because there are these soils which have lots of carbon, as steppe soils and savanna soils. So is it like that in Kazakhstan?
I know it from the literature that grasslands are a huge carbon source, but I don't know, because the temperature is high. So I would assume we usually have fires. So when there is a fire, there would be more carbon emitted, maybe. But yes.
Grassland is much better than arable land. So one of the measures discussed for increasing soil carbon storage is conversion of cropland to grassland. But then, of course, you have less food production. That's the problem with it.
Yes. But there's been, I know, one suggestion made by Alan Savoyer, maybe I pronounced it wrong, that he was transforming the lands, desertified lands in Africa to grasslands. But I'm not sure if his technique is really good and working.
Yes. The most important thing is for carbon storage in soils is that the soil is covered and protected, like the vegetation shields the soil from erosion, and it's always doing photosynthesis, and like whether a soil is a sink or a source for carbon depends on whether there is more photosynthesis than decomposition. This is a very delicate balance. So it's good always to have vegetated soil. Whether it's grassland or forest, of course, in very dry areas and in areas where you have lots of fires, then it's very difficult to raise a forest, because these areas are natural grasslands. But they still can be positive and in carbon storage.
Mm-hmm. So I think I can move to the next discussions on the impact of extreme weather events on soils. So I think here you could maybe mention or tell about the drawbacks of extreme events on soil or on ecosystem services.
Yes, of course, the greatest danger which we see, and it's happening everywhere, is like soil erosion, like whether it is in the mountains that there are landslides are occurring, or whether there's wind blowing away the soil, or whether the vegetation is destroyed, for example, by fires or windrow, and then the soil is exposed, and then soil is lost, and this means also carbon is lost, and then the fertile soil is washed away or blown away. So then we cannot create good crops or plant or get good yields from these soils, and it will be maybe difficult to raise vegetation or make the soil again resistant. And the most promising mitigation options in the agricultural sector are also the strategies which are taken by carbon farming and more recently regenerative agriculture. And so this aims at increasing the humus content, the carbon content of these soils, so then the water holding capacity is made better, and also the nutrient holding capacity is better. If there is more humus, more organic material in the soil, this is good for carbon sequestration. At the same time, it makes the soil more resistant and resilient against extreme weather events. And what you can do in the agricultural sector is you can keep the soil green as much as possible. So hopefully in the future, when you're driving around the countryside, you won't see any dark brown fields anymore, or very rarely. So it should be green with cover crops, even part outside the growing season and cropping season. And like the winter, for example, here in Central Europe, have become much warmer. So it's possible to keep the fields green. And it's also important because the snow was also protecting the soil from erosion. But if there's no snow, then it's better to have the soil green. So that's one option. Another, like the three most important options are this covering of the soil, the reduced tillage or minimum tillage, which also improves the biology, like the soil life, because like every time that the soil is tilled, like with big machinery going over there and moving around the soil, then it's tearing apart like the holes of the earthworms, the fungal network which keeps together the soil structures, and it's putting everything upside down. So like if you reduce the tillage, then the soil biology and the life in soil will improve. And this also improves the soil structure and the water holding capacity and the nutrient holding capacity. And the third and also very important strategy is to recycle all the organic material. So bring back everything into the soil that of the crop residues, etc. So in Austria, for example, there was a time between the 1960s and the 1990s where the soils lost a lot of carbon and were degraded. But since the 1990s, the soils have improved again and have increased their humus content and also become more resistant and resilient because, for example, it was prohibited to burn the fields and so to burn the stubbles of the straw on the fields. And several measures were taken which improved the quality and of the soil structure and the humus content in the soil. Yeah, which doesn't say, I don't say that we cannot do more, especially in the eastern part of Austria and also in the steep valleys in Austria. But maybe in Austria, the most important thing to do about soils is to reduce soil sealing and the loss of soil due to sealing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think in my country, because in summer I go to my grandparents to the village, they do still burn the field. Yes, I've seen them burning the residues. Maybe now in the future that I'm working in this field, in the future I can just tell them not to burn it, just keep it. And what you said exactly, but in the local language.
Okay.
Yes. So now I want to move to the most important part and interesting part. It's very interesting for me. So in 2019, you've been given an award, a Web of Science highly cited researcher and identified by Clarivet Analytics as one of the world's most influential contemporary researcher. That means top 1% ranking. So based on that experience and award, how to write a good scientific paper?
Okay. There's a very, very good book which I can recommend to you, written by Josh Schimmel. He's working at the University of California in Santa Barbara. Very nice place to go to. Mm-hmm. And he's maybe one of the most important or most famous soil microbiologists worldwide. And he has written very many nature papers and science papers and really has a very big impact on soil science. He has done a lot of work of trying rewetting also. You can look up this work. It's really interesting.
Yes, that would be interesting.
We also have published together because one of my students went to Santa Barbara for some time and worked there. And in this book, and the interesting thing is...
what's the title of the book? Sorry?
I have to forward. It's something about writing in science or scientific writing. I have to look it up again. Yeah, but his name is Josh Schimmel.
Maybe if you could send me an email with his name and the title, I could also provide it on the link for this.
Yes.
And
I
also
can,
myself.
I can send it to you.
Thank you.
And the interesting thing, like he has been to Austria a couple of times. I've been visiting him in Santa Barbara, which was very nice. And his wife, he is writing children books. And interestingly, he has learned a lot from his wife. And the challenge is, like, of course, you have to have good data. You have to make good experiments. You have to find out, like, usually, especially as a student, you're then sitting there with loads of data, and you have to find the interesting stuff in this heap of data.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to pose very clear questions, and then you have to somehow this is an art to write, to also find the story in your paper, in your data. So it's much in this book. It is also a lot about story writing, because, like, scientists are not different from other people. They like a good story, and they get tired very easily if they are just confronted with loads of difficult data and stuff, which is very difficult to understand. So you have to write in a way that that's easily understandable, and he's giving some tips on you have to really structure your sentences, you have to structure your paragraphs so that there is a flow in there, and one sentence leads to the next sentence, and one paragraph leads to the next paragraph. But first of all, most important of all, you have to find a story in your data. You have to have good data, and it also helps if you're working in a relevant field, which is, I was very lucky because the field I was working in has become more and more a hot topic, and politically hot topic also. And soil microbiology in general, like when I started, it was just people thought, well, soil biologists are maybe not the most interesting people. And
Yes.
now, if you look at the journals on soil microbiology, they have risen so much in impact factor, because now everybody is aware of the fact that these microbes down there, they are moving the whole world, because they are keeping all these biogeochemical cycles going. So it helps to be in a research field which is thriving and of high relevance, but sometimes you cannot tell in advance. So sometimes, of course, if you now or have been for the last 10 years a virologist, and maybe you have not had a lot of audience or impact, and suddenly with the COVID pandemics, then this kind of research became very relevant and interesting. So it's also a luck,
Mm-hmm. But for me, it's also interesting if you could share with your own experience, like, was it only the book which you helped, or how did you improve your writing skills? Especially in scientific paper.
I don't know, actually. No, I read the book quite late. I think what I profited a lot is working together with very good other scientists, and I learned from my colleagues. And I I took up lots of their skills and ideas, and like working in a good team with good researchers helps a lot. I have to say that like many of the top scientists had a very good teacher in their young years. And I had a very good professor, an old professor, but he knew nothing about soils. So I did my PhD totally on my own, more or less, because in my department where I worked was a plant physiology department. Nobody knew anything about soils. But then I had the luck to go to England and then meet some other researchers, and then I could learn from them. And so I managed to make a good PhD. It took quite a while, I have to say, but you can learn from your peers, and you can learn from other good researchers.
You've been saying also that it seems that in your PhD journey, you said like I've been working alone, but here, me as incoming PhD or a beginner researcher.
Congratulations! You have you already got the PhD position before you finished your master. That's really great. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. It's also, I was very surprised because it's one of the universities, and I would never imagine to be, but I'm really happy that I got into that university. And,
yes. Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Thank you. So, advice from you to all of the beginner scientists. What essential skills are like one must have to become a better than good researcher?
Well, I think the most important skill is motivation. Like you must really love what you're doing and be very focused, especially as a young woman. And I also have a family, and I have 2 children. So that's really difficult to combine all this and have a work-life balance. And in order to continue working in science, you really have to want this absolutely, and then you have to be prepared to also work at night and do. Yes, you have to put all your energy in there, and at the same time be careful with yourself and all the others. But of course, you have to be intelligent, and you have to have be an easy learner, and have to deal, not to be scared of data and mathematics, and flexible. So of course that helps a lot. And also I think I myself, I'm very much of a team player, and this helped me a lot. And in my position now, where I have the responsibility for many people, I think it's really important that you have a good hand with people, that you take them seriously, that you have an appreciative way with other people, and you are able to motivate other people. And even like as a PhD student, you might at some point have a master student on your side. Then you have to take care of this master student and motivate this master student. And you have to keep good relations with your colleagues. That's sometimes overlooked, a skill which is overlooked. And of course, there are some researchers which are these lonely stars, but I think these days in where science has become so complex, then it's really good to work in a team where you have different specialities working together. Yeah, and you have to be focused. So I think one of your questions is what advice would you give to your younger self? Maybe my advice to my younger self would be to be even more focused. I was quite focused, I must say, but for example, to do less projects. At some point, I had 13 projects. Managing 13 projects. This is too much, because then it's better to have 3 projects and do it carefully and look that you can publish all the data. There are so many unpublished data in my drawers, which is a pity, really. And it's also a waste of resources and time and energy. So, so be really focused. And not too much dispersed. There's so much interesting stuff around. So you can do this and you can do that. And but if you want to become a very good researcher, I think it's important that you restrict yourself also, not go into too many different things.
I think I understood very well, because I've been learning microeconomics. There is a term as opportunity cost. So whatever decisions you make, you should think about the cost. For example, if I'm just thinking of doing nothing today, so the opportunity cost would be higher, because if I sit down today or did something very useful, so it means that I really did something useful. So the 1 day cost. And staying.
But it's also important sometimes to do nothing. It's really, that is also something which is really important. You have to know your own resources, and you have also to know when you need rest, and you have to be careful with yourself and with other people. That is maybe very important guidance I would like to give young scientists. It's to be aware of your own limits and to take a rest when you need a rest, and to do fun, to have fun. That's really important, to have fun. Also in a group and with other people, that's not wasted time. No. And on the other hand, on the contrary, it's really important to have fun.
And also to be a good team player.
And to be a good team player and take care of yourself and of others. Don't demand too much of yourself. So you also, like 1 day a week, you should just have fun and relax. That's important. And you have to sleep and you have to recover. And otherwise you're exhausting yourself and going into a burnout, which I can see very often among scientists, and many scientists which have to deal with illnesses because they work too much. So if you're a very good and very famous scientist, they usually also knows where are my limits and where do I have to just to relax and forget about science.
I think here it's very good time to switch for general questions. And before we switch to general question, I would like to thank you very much for sharing the knowledge you've been acquiring, you've been studying, doing with my audience. So we will switch to general questions. Now I will ask you a few questions. You can answer as you would like. And I see that you already answered one of my questions. So first, if you would not become a scientist, what other career would you pursue?
Well, actually, there are lots of careers. Or when I was 18, then I had very different ideas. When I was 30, then I thought that maybe I was quite sure that I wanted to be a scientist, but then of course it's not so easy to have the position and to get paid for have a permanent position as a scientist. And so I also reflected into going into an international organization like FAO or I don't know, DG Environment, or there are many international organizations which do a lot of very important work about soils and nature and environment. But I have to confess, I recently found a notebook from I was at school, a child, a small child, and it was I was in maybe 7 years old or 8 years old, and it was a school book, and I had to write how do you say, a small homework and of what I wanted to become when I was grown up, and I realized when I read it, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to become a researcher. Like it said, I want to become a nature researcher. I want to go into the Amazon rainforest and research about nature and Indian culture. And so I've forgotten about it, but obviously it was there. This wish all the time.
Wow. 7 years old.
Yes, I think, yeah. So it was in primary school.
One more question. Have you been to Amazon?
No, I have never made it to Amazon. My daughter has, but I've never made it to Amazon, but it's maybe, yeah, I don't know. But it's something which I really wanted to do.
Wow, that's so interesting. I was also trying to ask from my parents, and recently I was also talking with my childhood friends who I would usually say to become, but I couldn't find, they don't remember. That was sad. Yes. So next question is pretty, let's say, relatable to this discussion, whole episode. Last time when I asked these questions from Professor Finke, he said that he's going to move to Sweden. So I just want to see how you would answer this question. Does climate change scare you?
Yes, it scares me. It really scares me, and it makes me very sad at times. When I can see drought, and I can see the big Lake Neusiedlersee is drying out, and these kind of things make me really sad. And if I read the IPCC report, and I did so very carefully because of my lectures, then the challenge for mankind is really, really great. It is a big challenge, and I can see the humans. Sometimes I visualize them like the lemmings. I don't know whether you know these animals which run down the cliff, over the edge of the cliff and fall down into the sea. So this is really scary, and it makes me really sad. But at the same time, this doesn't help anybody if I'm scared and if I'm sad. There is already also some social scientists which talk about this kind of people becoming totally depressed and not being able to do anything anymore because they think they cannot do anything. So I think I have to act, and I think if everybody in the world acts, then we can do it. We can make a change for a better future. And of course, we already are in the middle of climate change, and it's going to be worse. But like if everybody thinks that he can contribute, then in his small world and small surrounding, then this can make a big change. So lots of people, like whether it is a journalist or whether you're doing these kind of podcasts or whether someone is a technician and like everybody can contribute. And if everybody is willing to contribute in his like possibilities, then we can make a change. And I think we are far away from that because most people don't grab it, the consequences of it all. So most people don't yet understand it. So normal people on the street, they would not fully understand it. And this is because the whole society is somehow built on fossil fuels. So it's not easy to switch. And everybody loves his car. And we are so used that to all the energy and all the tools we use and machines we use. So it is really very difficult to change everything in a short time. But I think we have to try our best, and I think everybody has to do what he or she can do in her surrounding, and what he thinks he can do. We cannot do everything. We are all only persons, which also we cannot change. Like as a single person, you cannot change the world, but you can change a little bit. And if everybody changes a little bit, then it can change the world.
Yes, I still remember that when I was in one of your lectures, you mentioned some of the small steps to change your behavior. Like, you can actually not use the elevator. So I just remembered that stick in my head. And whenever I came home, instead of using elevator, I used the stairs. It's first good for my body. Second is I don't need to use the elevator because it's the same time the waiting, the same time would take. It's just one stairs, right? So I think that kind of small steps, day by day and action by action, we can also influence other people, right?
Yeah, so, that's a very nice example, Nazek. And yeah, actually, the social economists, they say that actually a lot of this transformation, which are necessary to combat climate change or global heating, we can say, are good for human well-being. So many things, we just have to change our habits. And as you say, taking the stairs it's good for our well-being. We sit a lot. Yeah.
Also a bicycle.
Yes.
Riding the bicycle, it's so good for your body and it's exercise. You don't need to go extra to gym if you do it every day.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. The last question, you could answer it as you want. So what is the meaning of life?
Well, This is not a small question. This is a big question.
Biggest of all the questions that you asked.
But of course, yeah, you have to think of that from time to time. Yeah, well, I can only say what for me it is. Of course, a very important part of my life, and I think everybody's life, is having good relationships, being good and honest to others and also to yourself, and try to live a life which is making things better. On the other hand, what I think to go one step further, I think it is very much about finding something you burn for, something you really are enthusiastic about. And contrary to what everybody thinks, it does not have to be something which you are so very good at. It must be something you are really enthusiastic about. So, for example, it could be that a small person wants to be a basketball player, or a deaf person wants to make music. So I think the important thing is not that you are good at it, but that you are enthusiastic about it, and you love doing it, and do it with all your energy. But at the same time, you have to be careful not to cross any borders, which is like your own borders or the borders of others. You must not harm yourself or harm others when you're so enthusiastic doing something. And ideally, what you're doing is also like helping somehow, and giving something to other people, and then I think it's really important that you're not attached to the outcome of whether you become famous or not. That's not within your realm of it. This has to do something with other, like you cannot influence that. It's beyond your influence. So you, for example, if you want to become a scientist, you have to be enthusiastic about doing science. You have to be careful what you do it, how you do it. But then you must not be disappointed if you don't become a famous scientist, because maybe the surrounding is not like that, so that there is no money for science, for example, or just you working on something which you really like, which at the moment is not the hot topic in science. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the result is. It just matters how you follow your ideas or what you're doing, and you're doing with your full enthusiasm. I think that's also like one of the keys to happiness, not to be attached to whether you become famous or whatever, but just like what you're doing and doing it with your full enthusiasm. For example, I last weekend I visited a friend who is a very good artist and painter, and she does it all day and every day, and she works really hard and a lot, and then has lots of ideas, and is a hard working person, but she does not earn a lot of money, and she can hardly survive, and she's not famous. She has not become famous. So she feels a bit disappointed about it. But I think you should not be disappointed, because you have this kind of art and you're doing what you're wanting to do. And that's nice. And it can be something absolutely, if you are a cleaner and you like cleaning and you're doing it very well and as good as you can, then it's your meaning of life. It can be your meaning of life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's a good point, because in this world, especially when we have social media, people try to like run for or have titles.
Yes.
And look more like, in modern world, we say cool. They want to look cool in front of others. And they try so hard, for example, taking TikTok videos, and they want to look good. But the thing is, you are doing it just to get the impression of others, of you doing it. And you yourself not like having any happiness or enjoyness, right? And also, maybe some people do. It's just my subjective. And you also mentioned an important point. I think it's Japanese technique. There is have like 30% you should work on your relationship, or 30% you should work on the other part, 30% you should work on your body, 30% you should work on yourself, and the other percent is your work. For example, work shouldn't take all of your life, like all of your being. So you should also pay attention to other stuffs. So I think that's also like, it's my personal opinion that many people are so depressed. Maybe that might be the reason. There are so many reasons, of course, social media and other things, but still people are not working on their other parts of themselves, right? They just like have work, or if they have other things, they just focus on that. But balancing all of this is maybe a good thing, if I could understand you right. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it's important to have fun and to enjoy it.
Yes. I'm going to Belgium to do my PhD, and I'm going to have a lot of fun, because Belgian people, I usually make fun of their having fun. They're always drinking beer. They're always having fun. But I would always ask them, like, when do you study? And they just say that they study like 1 week before the exams, but overall they have a lot of fun. So yes.
Yeah. No, then this is a good approach, and nice to go to Belgium and work in Belgium. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think it's a good country. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Also mentioning like other parts, paying attention to yourself, and also the group work, being nice to others. I think in hustle world, we sometimes forget to be nice to other people, because we have so much deadlines, or we have so much things to do, and we just forget like simple things. It seems so simple, but we forget to do these things, right? Overall, I just would like to thank you very much for making this episode to happen, and sharing with your experience and answering the questions sincerely. I appreciate it very much. And if you could, maybe in the future we would have more of this, or just for now, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Good luck, Naseke, with all your activities.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Then have a nice evening. Bye-bye.